Hello up there on the sunny Gold Coast from down here on what is a rather grey and cold Sydney day. Thank you so much, Gold Coast Libraries, for inviting me to do a virtual author encounter for you. I know it's not quite the same as being able to do these events in person, but in these very strange times we have to improvise, and this is the next best thing. So I am here today to talk to you about my third novel, the Banksia Bay Beach Shack, and I will tell you a little bit about it and how we got there, and then there will be some questions at the end that Gold Coast Libraries have sent through. So the Banksia Bay Beach Shack. After her grandmother Lillian's funeral, Laura finds a broken pendant and an old black and white photo taken at the beach with an inscription on the back that reads, Gigi and Lily, Sisters of Summer, Banksia Bay, 1961. And there are two things that Laura has always known about the woman who raised her, and they are that she hated the beach and that she never had a sister. So Laura heads to the sleepy beachside town of Banksia Bay to try to uncover the secrets of the past. Among the eclectic group of locals she meets is the owner of the beach shack, Virginia, who Laura suspects holds the key to unlocking the secrets of Lillian's past. What Laura uncovers is a story of two unlikely friends, Lily and Gigi, and a series of devastating events that not only change the lives of those two young women, but the lives of everyone around them, with consequences that reach far into the present. As Laura pieces together the fragments of that fateful summer 60 years ago, Virginia must choose whether to hold on to her secrets or set them free, and Laura has to decide how high a price she is willing to pay to reveal the truth. The Banksia Bay Beach Shack is a story of first love and last chances, and of the truths and lies we tell that can affect people for many generations to come. I think maybe to set the scene, we might read an extract now from the moment in the book where Laura and Virginia meet for the first time. On the small deck were a couple of white metal tables and chairs. As Heath and old Salty sat there, an old woman dressed in tattered denim overalls came out of the shack with a cup of coffee for each man. The front wall of the two-story beach shack was painted blue. One side of the building was red, another yellow. All the painting was flaking. Inside, the shack was lined with shelves, and Laura just had to take a closer look. Heath waved to her as she passed inside, but she didn't respond, captivated by the sight before her. Against one wall, painted red, the same as the outside, the shelves were covered with books. Second-hand books of all descriptions, from Tolkien to Jackie Collins, from instructional guides and building wooden birdhouses to an unauthorised biography of Hugh Jackman. On the yellow side of the shack, a worn sofa sat in front of a counter, stacked high with mismatched coffee mugs, some in bold plain colours of blue and red and green, some with brightly hued patterns. The woman who'd brought Heath and old Salty their cups stood behind the counter, watching Laura move around the shack. "Can I help you with something?" She looked at Laura over her lime green glasses. "Oh no, I was just... Actually, coffee would be good, thank you." "Well, first of all, I need you to be taking those sunnies off. I don't like serving people if I can't see their eyes. You can tell a lot about a person by their eyes, you know." The woman turned to the coffee grinder and set about making Laura's drink. Laura pushed her sunglasses up her forehead and rested them on top of her head. "I'm Laura. I'm renting the holiday house 1 street over." "Welcome, Laura. I'm Virginia, owner of this little..." Virginia turned to hand Laura her cup and stopped, staring at her. All the colour drained from the woman's face. Virginia's heart beat fast, her breathing quickened. What type of wizardry was this? The woman standing in front of her was the spitting image of Lily. Maybe she was having a stroke. Women her age did that, had strokes. Or aneurysms. Did you hallucinate with an aneurysm? "Hey, Virginia, you all right in there?" Ian called out from the deck. "You going to give our visitor her coffee or make the young lady beg for it?" Okay, so if that old relic of a surfer could see the girl, then maybe she wasn't hallucinating. Though given his misspent youth taking any number of hallucinogenic substances, coupled with the fact that he was even older than her, maybe he couldn't be trusted either. Virginia turned to glance at the old man and saw Heath standing up. "I've got this." Heath put his hand on Ian's shoulder and walked towards her. "Gran, is something wrong?" He took the mug from her hand and gave it to, what did she say her name was? Lauren? Laura? He gave it to Laura. The woman really was there in front of her, now staring at her with a rather quizzical expression on her face. Virginia and Ian might be so old they imagined things, but not Heath. If Heath saw her too, she was real. Easing into the armchair, Virginia watched Laura out on the deck as she sipped her coffee, chatting with Ian. Who was she? And what was she doing here? Was she a mere coincidence, or was she an echo of the past? Virginia would have to raise her guard. Not that she'd let it down in the last 60 years. Not once, not ever. She was always so careful. It was only a matter of time, though, she supposed, that the ghosts of her buried yesterdays would come back to haunt her. Not that they ever left. Not once. Not ever. So that's when Laura and Virginia meet for the first time. And the rest of the novel explores both of their histories and the history of Lily and what happened that summer 60 years ago. The original inspiration for the Banksia Bay Beach Shack actually came to me when I was home in Coffs Harbour, where I grew up, a couple of Christmases ago. And my husband, daughter and I were walking along the beach one day, not long after it had rained. And I don't know if you've ever walked along the beach not long after rain, but the sand seems to hold on to the chill of the rain for a really long time afterwards. And it's the kind of chill that can seep right into your bones. So we were walking along the beach, barefoot obviously, and the cold was seeping through me. And I had this flashback of a memory of probably when I was a teenager, I imagine, sitting on the sand and having that cold seep right through me into my spine. And then I had a vision of a woman sitting on the sand, that cold seeping in, and a storm rolling in. And if you have already read the Banksia Bay Beach Shack, you will recognise that scene, which is probably around, I don't know, maybe 2/3 of the way in to the book, where Laura is sitting under the jetty on the beach at Banksia Bay there as a storm rolls in, and she's not getting out of the way. And that is how the story started. I am not a plotter by any stretch of the imagination. I just start with one scene and I have to figure out who my characters are and what they're doing from that one scene. So I had this scene of Laura sitting under the jetty and I had to think, you know, who is she? Why is she there? What is so upsetting in her life that she's not getting out of the way of this storm? And that was the beginnings of the Banksia Bay Beach Shack. It was a different time writing this novel than my other two. When I wrote The Cottage at Rosella Cove and the Kookaburra Creek Café, I wasn't under contract with a publisher. This was in my pre-published days. And so I had all the time in the world to faff around with those two novels. One of them took me 3 years to write. The other one took me 5 years to write. And that's not 5 years straight. That's writing for a couple of weeks, stepping away for a month, coming back to it, that sort of thing, fitting it in between the rest of, you know, life's happenings. But I had that time and the freedom to do that because I wasn't under any time constraints with those two. However, when I was writing the Banksia Bay Beach Shack, I was under contract with Penguin. And I pitched the idea for the Banksia Bay Beach Shack to them in, I think it was the October of 2018. And they wanted the first draft by April 2019. So I had 5 to 6 months to write it. So it was a very different experience for me, and particularly for somebody who in the industry is known as a pantser, somebody who flies by the seat of their pants. The fact that I don't plot out and plan my novels meant that it was a really different experience having to write a novel in such a short period of time. The advantage to that, though, was that it really helped me focus on the heart of the story much quicker and not go off into too many different tangents, which I am wont to do quite a bit. So that deadline did force me to focus in a way that I hadn't focused before. And the themes that came through the book, which again is not something I plan, I just go where the story takes me. And as I'm writing the story, the themes reveal themselves to me. The themes that revealed themselves while writing the Banksia Bay Beach Shack were the themes of racism, which we see through Costas's story in the 1960s, misogyny, which we also see in the 1960s with Gigi and Lily, and the expectations that are placed on both of those young girls in terms of what they should and shouldn't be doing with their lives. And then the biggest theme I think that I explored was probably the theme of truth and lies, and how they're not always as black and white as we think they are. And sometimes we may be keeping a secret or telling a lie for the absolutely right reasons, yet they still have consequences that maybe we don't understand at the time. And that was a really interesting experience for me as a writer to explore, because when I was growing up, I was quite a righteous teenager, like annoyingly so. And everything to me back then was black and white. It was right or it was wrong, and there was no in between. But as I've grown older and lived life and got more experience, I certainly have come to realise that there's so many shades of grey in our life. And this is one of those things that I had to explore. You know, were Virginia and her friends right to keep the secret that they did? Was Costas right to tell the lie that he did? And their motivations were absolutely pure, but the consequences were life-changing for so many of these characters. And then, of course, that naturally flows into the theme of guilt, that Virginia had kept this secret for 60 years, and now she has an opportunity to let that secret free, and should she, and what would the consequences be of that? And the guilt that she carries every day of her life, you know, for that 60 years was something, you know, that was really interesting for me to explore as well. So I think that pretty much sums up the story and how I came to write it. And I have some questions here that Gold Coast Libraries sent through. So I might go through those now. I'll read out the question and then do my best to answer it, and we'll see how far we get with that. So the first question that the library sent through was, what did you enjoy most about writing this particular book? There are a couple of things that I really enjoyed, and I think one of the biggest things, and if you've read any of my books, you will see this as a common thread. I love exploring the connection between the past and the present. I don't seem to be able to write a novel in just one timeline. I always have a past timeline running through. In the Kookaburra Creek Café, we go back into the 1960s with Hattie's story. In the Cottage at Rosella, Cove, we go back into the 1940s with Ivy's story. And in Banksia Bay, we go back into the 1960s and the surf culture that existed in those tiny beachside towns in Australia at the time. And I always love how that past impacts the present, even if we don't know it. You know, Laura had no idea that her grandmother had a past in Banksia Bay, yet it has massive ramifications on Laura's life. And that interplay of past and present is something that I really, really love to explore. So that was a really fun thing to do with this novel, and particularly because I chose surfing as, you know, one of the minor plot themes that runs through, having to have a look at what surfing was like in the 1960s in small Australian towns. And Heath, our love interest in the present day story, who teaches Laura to surf, and that was a really fun thing for me to explore. They were probably the two things that I really enjoyed the most. And I also found it really interesting researching the 1960s and what sort of racism was around back then and how that played out. Costas is of Greek heritage. His parents are post-war migrants. And, these days we couldn't, imagine the Greeks not being part of our society. Yet back then they were different and it was weird. And, that has huge ramifications. I won't go into any spoilers for you, but it has huge ramifications back in that 1960s time thread. So, doing all that research is always something really interesting for me because I always discover something that I didn't know. So, for example, when I was researching Costas and his family and how that would play in Banksia Bay, I learned that there was a Greek civil war shortly after World War II, and that was something that I knew nothing about. So it's those little hidden gems when I'm researching for a novel that I find absolutely fascinating. The second question from the library: which places inspired the fictional setting of Banksia Bay? Well, I've probably already touched on that. This one for me, all of my stories are fictional towns. Rosella, Cove, Kookaburra Creek, Banksia Bay, they're all fictional towns. But Banksia Bay to me feels like the closest to home that I've written so far. So the closest to Coffs Harbour, which isn't surprising given that that was where the first spark of an idea for the story came from, was when I was up home. And, the jetty with the beach and the rolling hills next to it. Banksia Bay is a smaller town than Coffs Harbour of my childhood, but it still has very much that feel to me. I tend not to answer that question too often because I've answered that in the past with my other novels, and I've been told by readers that I'm wrong, that they had a completely different setting in their heads, for the fictional town. But the fact that this was inspired by a trip to Coffs Harbour, I think I can probably get away with admitting that to me it feels very much like home. Next question. Tell us about your continuing journey as a writer with a growing number of books under your belt. Yeah, you would think that it would be getting easier, but it's not. It's possibly harder. I'm in the middle right now of editing my fourth book, which will hopefully come out in March or April next year, called The Wattle Island Book Club. And it's not getting any easier because I think there's a lot more pressure. Not necessarily external pressure, but pressure on yourself. I think when your first book comes out into the world, there's no expectations. You're just thankful that you're finally published and you put it out there and you hope that people enjoy it. Now that I'm up to editing number 4, I've definitely put a lot of pressure on myself. Will it be as good as the other stories? Will it be received as well by readers? And so I think that's probably one of the challenges of having a number of books behind you. Obviously, the great thing is that I'm reaching more readers. I'm doing more events like this. I've done events in South Australia via virtual means this year, which I haven't done before. And connecting with readers is always the best part of this job. How would you describe your writing style? Well, I have touched on that I am a pantser. I fly by the seat of my pants. In all 4 of my books, actually, I have started with one scene in particular that really kind of tugs at my heart and begs me to be explored, and I then write the story around that. And interestingly, each one of those scenes, when the book is finished, ends up being in the second half, quite often towards the end of the book. So I sort of tend to start with that scene 3/4, of the way through the book, and then have to write back to get me to that point. Sometimes I wish I was a plotter and a planner. It might make it a slightly smoother journey, but I do enjoy not knowing. I do enjoy my characters taking me on their journey and listening to them and having them tell me where they want to go and how they want their story to be told. But we're all different. Every writer has a slightly different approach. And that's part of the joy, I guess, of writing and what makes us all different as storytellers. What advice do you have for budding writers? The best advice I can give you, if you are an aspiring author, is to write, write, and write. I've done a few courses before I got published, and obviously now that I'm an author, I meet a lot of people as well. And, you know, one of the things that surprises me is how many people say they want to be a writer, but they're not actually writing. You can't be a writer if you're not writing. And as with anything in life, the more you do it, the better you get at it. So write, then find one or two really trusted readers who will be honest with you about your work, and go through it again and again and again before you even look at approaching a publisher or an agent. How did you spend lockdown? Editing was how I spent lockdown, and doing lots of virtual author events, which was the fun part of being in lockdown. And what am I looking forward to for the rest of the year? I'm looking forward to us all being able to get back to normal. You guys are doing really well up there in Queensland. Further south, where we're, you know, struggling a little bit. Victoria has just gone into a second lockdown. I'm a little afraid that those of us in New South Wales will be heading the same way in a week or two. So the thing that I'm looking forward to most for the rest of this year is things starting to get back to normal. Fingers crossed that we can do that. Which other writers inspire you? I'm inspired by anyone that can finish a novel. Knowing what it takes to get there now, whether it's a genre I love to read or not, I'm inspired by anyone that can actually complete the process. I'm inspired by lyricists. I think the way that somebody who writes a song can capture an entire emotion in just a couple of lines is just amazing. Within my own genre, I love Monica McInerney, Jojo Moyes, Josephine Moon, all of those beautiful writers within women's fiction. And I'm also really in awe of fantasy writers, the way they can create entire new worlds and structure such complex stories around them blows my mind. I don't think I'll ever be smart enough to be able to write a fantasy novel. We have 2 questions to go. Second last question, what are you reading at the moment? Well, I've just finished Bottlebrush Creek by Maya Linnell, which was a lovely rural romance that I enjoyed reading. And I'm about to dive into a debut author, Kyle Perry, and his novel, The Bluffs. It's set in Tasmania, and it's been described as Jane Harper meets Picnic at Hanging Rock. And I'm really excited, but also a little bit scared to start reading that one, because I'm the biggest scaredy cat in the entire world. And so I'm not sure I can cope with what I suspect will be quite a suspenseful, dark and gritty novel. But it's had such a good rap that I have to read it. And the last question is, what's the next big project for Sandie Docker? Well, I've touched on that. As I said, I'm editing the Wattle Island Book Club. That will be next year's release, which I'm really excited about. Also a little bit worried about, because at the moment it is still in a bit of a mess. But I'm sure a couple more sessions of the editing and I'll have that under control, I hope. I hope my publisher doesn't see this to know how uncontrolled I am at the moment. No, it will be fine. It's going to come together, and I'm really looking forward to that. The other big project I was working on until COVID decided to throw a spanner in the works was I got together with some amazing writers and podcasters, and we created our own literary festival called the Northern Beaches Readers Festival. And we had the best writers of Australian commercial fiction coming. We had Michael Rowbotham, Chris Hammer, Christian White, Sally Hepworth, Rachel Johns. We had the most amazing lineup of authors coming, and that was going to be in September of this year, but with COVID we have had to postpone it. So hopefully, as long as COVID behaves itself, next year we will be able to kick that festival off, and I'm really looking forward to that. So that is it from me. I hope you guys are staying safe up there in the Gold Coast and being kind to each other. Thank you so much for joining me And thank you to the Gold Coast Libraries for hosting me. You can see in the bottom corner there my social media links if you want to come and find me online anywhere. And hopefully, fingers crossed, next year when the Wattle Island Book Club comes out, I will be able to come up there in person and see you all then. Thank you so much for joining me. Take care of yourselves. I'll hopefully see you soon. Bye.